I see only one.
Yeah, but someone keeps on my So
Is it time?
I think it's time.
All right. Well, it just takes me a little while. Yes, it's just. Good. Not good morning yet. Okay.
It's lit up.
Hello. Can you hear me? No. No. Yeah, you can, but you're very close. Let's try this one. Let's try this one. No. Interesting. No, this works. This should work. Yeah, that is the question. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Mtgvenue working group. So happy to see so many of you this morning here. So this is Melinda Shore, and I'm Jonne Soininen, and we're here to entertain you for the next hour and a half, I think. I would like to remind you, of course, the note well. I don't know if there's something patentable about this, but if you do patent something about this, you should tell about that. Before going to the agenda, I would like to ask for volunteers for minute takers and Jabberscribe. I'm happy to volunteer you as well, the ones that I know, but it's easier if you volunteer yourselves. Any volunteers for minute takers?
I'll get in on Jabber.
You'll get on Jabber. Thank you very much. Minute takers? I think Timo volunteered for minute taker for this meeting. Thank you, Timo. And the next is that we have an agenda, and this has been posted on the webpage as well. We'll start with the discussion on the Mtgvenue selection process, and then we go to discuss a little bit about the Mtgvenue selection policy as well, which hasn't had quite as much discussion and progress as the process yet, but we will go to that as well. And just to remind you of the basically scope here. So we are talking about what are the policies and processes of selecting venues. We're not talking about individual venues themselves. So let's not talk about how good after elections some place is and some place isn't. But let's look forward on kind of like seeing what are the policies and processes that the IETF should use when selecting venues. Is there something you want to add still? Or? Nope. So I think the first presenter is Dave. Pull up your slides.
Good morning. So who here in the room has read the current draft, which I believe is -02? Okay. And who's been tracking the email discussion? As unenergetic as it's been, it's still there. Okay. All right. So this is concerning changes that will produce -03. Next slide. And that's what we'll cover. Next slide. All right. So these are assorted recent issues. Might not be 100% of them, but I tried to list any of the ones that seem substantive. And so, for example, there was an exchange that renewed this morning concerning the "Why are we here?" paragraph. And while that's important by some measures, it's not the substance of doing the work, which is where the interesting controversies are. And so we'll lock that down. And I don't think there's much debate going on about that, but that also was a point of activity. The question of how to give text that provides useful guidance for satisfying a range of food requirements without locking us away from too many venues is an interesting balancing act. The current text in the document tried to navigate that. There have been more discussions going on this week, and we think we have what's actually a smaller proposed change than I might have predicted, but nonetheless a proposed change, and there's a slide after this that will go into that. And we have some preliminary agreement among a few people, and I thank them for their work on that. But then we want to see whether it's comfortable for others. The political considerations one, current draft has text. There was discussion about that online. I think we navigated that to a useful position. And I'm touching these just as a reminder in case anybody wants to raise anything about them, but I think that they are settled issues. The numbers, of course, are the sections that these concern. On the primary hotel, there was discussion about whether the current model of targeting 1/3 of the expected attendance was the right choice. This is another balancing act. A smaller number lets us get to more hotels, but it fills up in microseconds instead of milliseconds. And a bigger number doesn't fill up as quickly, but locks us out of hotels. Where the discussion landed seems to have been that we stay with what we have. And I haven't seen that as a controversial point on the list. I thought the discussion was reasonable about it. There's been a little more discussion among people here this week, and it still landed in the same place. So if anybody wants to propose that that be different, they probably have an uphill battle to convince others that it's a change to make, and that will include trying to explain the balancing act being better for that alternative. So I mentioned, why do we meet? I think that the only thing pending is a very small change that was proposed this morning. It's not the end of the world if it's adopted, and it's not the end of the world if it isn't. Unfiltered access, that was another one that was debated a fair amount, and where we landed is the text that's in the draft now, which I think is been fairly stable text for a while. That's a particularly difficult one, because to do that precisely enough probably means we couldn't go almost anywhere. And so the current language is more general than an engineer might want, but necessary for the facilities and ops people. Accessibility, I think, is a tough one. We have current language which I think has no operational benefit. It sounds good, it's reasonable, it's clearly the right intent, and there's no way to know whether you're satisfying it or not. And to make that even more interesting, I'll now raise the point that comes up periodically on the list, and this is one of a number of topics, and that is, we can't just say, oh, ADA, done, because we're not an American organization, we're international. And to the extent that there are specifications that we like and we want to have apply for accessibility or any other topic that apply to all of the venues around the world that we go to, if it is in fact tied to a particular nation, we have a challenge with enforceability. I'll distinguish, it's not on this list, but there's language now, and it's from one particular place in the current draft and has been moved and tweaked a bit more generally, that we conform to local laws. And if you think about it, it's like, well, duh. Would we go somewhere where we wouldn't conform to local laws? But the main point behind that text being there in that form is to remind us that we are subject to local laws, and that we can't really say, oh, you have to conform to the American laws or the Dutch laws or the Swiss laws. So I'm not sure what language we can put in that will work. But all that's in there now says that facilities shall be accessible. And as the on-list discussion showed, that it's not clear what we mean by that. And more importantly, for the folks finding venues, it's not clear how you test whether it succeeded. The other piece to this that to me is surprising and confusing and problematic is it's labeled as desired. And saying desired means it's okay to go to a place that isn't accessible for some definition of accessible. I think we have to get better language and we have to make it mandatory, but I'm not sure where to go with that. Suggestions?
Alyssa Cooper. I imagine we're not the first organization that has ever grappled with this. So perhaps we could look around or ask our friends, the W3C or the Linux Foundation.
So
One
the
of those.
on-list discussion did have some references to other documents, and I think the issue is somebody advocating a particular choice and then the group agreeing to it. Yeah, it's pretty soft, your microphone.
Oh, it is on. It's on. You just have to use
It is on, but it's very, very soft, as this seems to be as
Maybe
well.
that's intentional. It's a good idea to keep you guys
Yeah.
quiet.
Okay. This is not one that I had followed on the list. So
Barry Leba. In some of the organizations I'm aware of, there's they don't work on community consensus driving the venue selection, and the venue selection people have their own mechanisms, and they don't have it written down. So yes, we're not the only organization to need to do it, but many of them don't have it written down. We can look at the ones that do, but
let me stress, my feeling is that we need to have some text that gives useful guidance to the venue staff, the venue selecting staff, so that when they go to look at a place, they have something that will let them evaluate reasonably objectively and reasonably easily without locking us out of too many places.
Lou Berger speaking as a co-author, but by no means an expert in this field. So to Alyssa's comment, I did just what you said when we were putting this draft together, and I went and searched, and I found what I thought was a really good reference, and I put that in the document. That's as good as I could find as a non-expert. What we haven't done is gone and found an expert, and you usually have to pay for them, and said, let's, help us craft the language. So something that we might consider is whether we as an organization want to go to that expense. With a finance chair hat on, I'll say, please no, but we'll also do what the community wants.
Probably depends on how much the person costs.
Alyssa Cooper. Thanks, Lou. That's helpful. I think one place that we could just ask quite easily, I don't think she would have the answer herself, but we had Motoko here last time to talk about sort of human rights issues generally, and I know that they have worked with some, in the frame of meeting planning. I don't know if she has any resources about this specifically, but it's not hard to ask.
Microphone.
But sending her an email doesn't cost anything, and so I'm happy to do that if people think it would be helpful.
If it's okay that I jump the queue to respond. I don't think it's an issue of finding experts. There's a lot of experts out there who help organizations with this, and we can go to the right expert and ask for the right problem. I don't think this is a human rights thing. If it's accessibility, we go to someone who's an accessibility expert who works with international organizations and does that for the living. We can do that. The question is whether we want to pay for that.
So my sense is that this topic is one that is pretty well understood as an area of expertise with people who know a lot and can be quite practical about it, and that what will prove to be the hard part for us is defining boundaries to what we insist on versus not insist on.
Andrew Sullivan. So I think that this discussion is in some sense a species of a more general problem that I've raised more than once with this document. And since you raise it here, I want to press on it again. And that is this distinction between mandatory and desired versus important and would be nice, and the distinction between requirements versus considerations. I think that entire matrix is completely hopelessly confused, and I don't understand how it's going to provide guidance to the IUC when it needs to make these decisions, because I don't know how to decide whether something whether a for instance, desired requirement is to be traded off against an important consideration or not, and I just don't know how to make this work.
So in fact, that's either the next slide or the slide after it. So thank you.
Oh, okay.
No, no, but
It's just that this thing was up here.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. No, it's certainly an issue for this and several others.
Okay, Mary Barnes. So the document that Lou referred to, right? Why is it that we can't use that as our reference and guidelines? Someone else hashed through it, right? That organization, right? And I would think that we could use those guidelines, go to whoever you're trying to negotiate with, and at least understand the limitations and let people know ahead of time what the limitations are. We're not going to get perfection in any of this, right? But, okay.
Andrew Dolgano,
I'm not familiar with the document, or at least I don't remember reading it.
Okay, this is Lou Berger invited just as
Go,
co-author.
go.
The issue is that we don't have change control of that document. So if they make some change that we don't agree with, what does that mean? What does that mean to the community? So if we make it mandatory to follow someone else's document, it may not be right for the community.
Luke, talk closer to the mic.
Oh, sorry. That's what the point was.
Hey, Andrew Dolgano, individual contributor. First, I'll give you some background just so you know that my next statement will not be too misread. I'm Canadian, but I'm of a Polish origin. I was actually impacted in my life for those political considerations. And now I'm going to say this. We have to be careful what we put in, guys, because in my organizations, I have people of Iranian descent who refuse to go to US as well because of how they were treated at the border.
Excuse me just a second. You're just to make sure I'm clear. You're going back to the political
Yeah,
considerations.
I'm going
bullet.
back because
That's fine. Okay.
it's a slippery slope. Instead of doing that, we can put things in our documents that represent what we say. We want to come here and be able to say without any limitations on any topic that's related to our work. That also includes privacy, censorships, things like that. We should be able to come here and have a free internet access to anywhere we want to have an access to. Those things we should be putting in and not try to, and those things when put in will make a very easy selection of venue. To some countries, yes, to some countries, no.
So the mailing list had significant.
And I live in Singapore, by the way, and I've witnessed the discussion that, again, educate people about the issues and real threats of certain countries or perceived threats.
So the working group mailing list had a discussion in this realm and landed on some language. If anyone thinks the language is not acceptable, they should raise that again on the mailing list. The second piece to this, the operational piece, is that one of the purposes behind vetting cities or through the early announcement of cities that are not being looked at immediately for choice, but rather for being possible for choice at some unknown point in the future. One of the reasons to do that is to avoid our having to specify criteria and leave that choice up to the community. So the range of things that you're talking about, if the community says for the concerns of the IETF community, this venue is not satisfactory in those regards, then we don't go there.
Hi, Jason Livingood. Quick comment about accessibility. I think that what you mean is wheelchair accessible. And if that's the case, why not just say wheelchair accessible and be done with it? I think that, we tend to in the IETF act in a way that's sort of like waterfall software development. This document's got to be perfect and we can't ship it until it's done. I would suggest keep it simple, get something in there and update it over time, once a year or something like this as we learn from how this stuff is applied. And I would say in terms of external references, if we're concerned that some group might update it, if they do update it, first question is, have they ever updated? If this is just a theoretical question, we love rat holing on theoretical questions. But if they actually update it in the future, then update the document or something, or pull in all their requirements and cite them in some other way. But I think keep it simple. We can complexify everything here, and it gets a bit ridiculous.
So for reference, my own thinking landed similar to where yours has in terms of the pure pragmatics, and I floated that on the list and nobody responded, or if they did, it wasn't in the positive.
Okay, Mary Barnes back again. So on the, following back up on Lou's thing about the document changing related to Jason's point, to me, that document is way better than nothing at all. And just saying wheelchair accessibility, right, is part of it. There is more there. So I can understand that document may change, right? But to me, it's a good starting point. And again, we're not going to get perfection, right? It's recommendations, but let's at least know going in, these are the things that are desirable, and let's make sure we understand what that facility can provide in terms of those features, right?
Speaking as a librarian, former, Melinda Shore, when you provide a citation, you can also provide version information, edition information, date information, and so on. So. Yeah.
John Levine, I think I'm going to say more or less what Jason said. I mean, looking at these accessibility documents, they have long lists of criteria, some of which seem more relevant to us than others. I mean, for example, they have all sorts of stuff about accessibility for blind people, and we have at least one regular attendee who's blind. You know, on the other hand, they have criteria like elevators must have Braille labels. Okay, and I'm thinking we go to Taiwan, and it happens that Taiwanese Braille is completely unrelated to American Braille. So my suggestion would be that the wording it might be useful to say, here's a bunch of accessibility guidelines to look at, and the IAOC should consider the accessibility of the proposed venue basically considering who we expect to attend. It probably means that wheelchair accessibility with the people who come now is the issue that's the most important. But, you know, as we get older and people have different issues, that might change. And I think I would rather have the document say, just make sure it works for the people who are going to come.
So let me test something, and that is to have two bullets, two requirements. One is that along the lines of the meeting facility and the hotel shall have good wheelchair access to common resources and rooms, and that's mandatory. And then additional accessibility is to be desired, and cite the document that Lou has in mind. And we don't make decisions at IETF meetings, and so I'm just going to ask whether people think that's a reasonable approach for resolving this.
Why not?
Go to the
mic. Yeah.
Why not? Sorry.
Lou Berger, I was actually coming up to basically say it. You said it better. I fully support that position. I think it's very workable from the concerns related to referencing an external document, and I think it's as good as we can get without bringing such a document into our domain. And we could do that, but we should recognize that there's time and expense and all of our time involved in that. So I think it's as good as we can get. So I really support that.
Unless we're going to be reopening this document here early. Hey, Andrew Dolgano. Unless we're going to be reopening this document early, why not just say that, you know, every now and then we go to meeting selections, we're going to poke the community based on the criteria in that document to actually realize, because today there might be a wheelchair, tomorrow maybe something else we're not going to put in today. So poke community in advance with criteria which are important, and then we will know. Yeah, and then this when we select venues, we can take a relatively up-to-date result of a survey sent to the list. People may say those are important. Please select those. Otherwise, we're gonna put criteria that either will be valid or will stop being valid or will be out of date or will be spinning this back and forth.
Any other discussion or comments on this slide, items on this slide? Next slide then. All right, so this is where the discussions on food text have landed. The first two bullets are in the current draft. I believe this is correct. This will go back a slide. I put it there. I didn't put it here. No, I didn't. All right. So search for food. It's in the draft on food. Sorry. Where the discussions landed seems to be satisfied with the third bullet. I will mention that one reading of the proposed change produced a comment, but this is redundant with the first two bullets, and that led to pointing out that the purpose of the third bullet is to integrate the first two bullets in a particular way. So the first two bullets end up serving as a foundation. Notice the second bullet is not mandatory, whereas for the third it is. So anybody finding themselves having a reaction that requires discussion? I think I'll do the hum thing. Folks who think this will be workable and sufficient to the purpose, hum. Folks who think we need more work on this. Thank you so much. And I should call out Laura on the staff side and Mary and Yona on the food side for their considerable contributions over the course of this week and last week in trying to find this balance. Yay. Okay, other issues. So this is the first bullet is the one that Andrew raised. It could easily take all the remaining time. Unfortunately, it's also the foundation. The other bullets aren't useful until we figure this out. The current document has a model that I don't really understand very well. From what I can tell, neither do a lot of other people. I know it was motivated by a conceptual framework. It's just I never fully understood it. And there are 4 labels. And so that's the first sub-bullet. And in trying to figure out, and there's been some discussion on the list. I think that the discussion has tended to divide between keeping the 4 labels and figuring them out better versus going to 2 labels of mandatory and optional. Where I personally landed is in between. And the explanation I'll give for that is there's stuff that we must satisfy. And if we can't satisfy it, we don't go there. Period. Full stop. Really simple. There is stuff that we'd like, but none of it is a showstopper. And that's, I'll say nice because no one will overinterpret that. And then there's some stuff that we are willing to trade off on, and the trade-off stuff might be difficult, and we need to be careful about the idea of trading off, and there's more discussion. But that's a set of things that we want enough to press for, but not necessarily enough to treat any one of them as a showstopper. And that's, so I landed in personally as wanting the 3 categories. Discussion?
Hi, I'm Bob Hinden. Yeah, so I've finished reading this, and yeah, my reaction was 4 was too many, because I mean I'm on the meeting committee and I've been on the IOC, and is important. It seems to me important is more important than desired, and so I found this very ambiguous. So I think 3 would be better. I'm not exactly sure what the words are. And then also later in the document, in 3.2, it also uses the word an optimal facility. That shouldn't be here. We should use these words and not add other adjectives to. I don't know how optimal and desired go together in the same paragraph.
Good point.
Glenn Dean. My overall comment is that I think we're spending too much time on the word and the meaning of it. This document is guidance to the IOC. It's not a piece of code that's going to execute with if then else's. And if it doesn't execute properly, the code crashes. We have intelligent people on the IOC. We put them there. We selected them through the non-com. Let them do their job and give them the guidance they need with some words, but they're intelligent people. They can interpret the words and go do their job.
So don't sit down yet. I have a feeling what I'm about to say is not just my view. That got us Singapore. That got us this working group. In other words, we've demonstrated that while it's an entirely reasonable model, it isn't sufficient to the community.
So since I'm not sitting down, I can say this. I don't agree that that got us Singapore or this meeting. I think what drove this meeting was that there wasn't formal guidance that was captured and provided to the IOC, and that this is that formal guidance, but it's guidance, not code, and it's not regulatory language that we would have in other spaces. It's guidance from the community to that group, for what it's worth.
We got Singapore because we didn't educate people and they made the wrong arguments. We got Singapore because Andrew Dolgano, because we didn't educate people and we get wrong arguments because of that. I agree with your three statements. I think if we want to have a trade-off of the category, which is I think important, we probably should minimum percentage of trade-off things that we do want to satisfy. So let's say if we have 10 of those trade-off categories, you at least need to meet 6 or whatever the number is. You guys discuss it. Otherwise, the trade-off really becomes nice. So it should have a little. It's important for that, but I think it needs a little bit of extra weight.
This is Andrew Sullivan. So I understand why you suggested that deciding on the number of these things is necessary to continue the rest of this, but I would like to frame this as potentially another way to do it. So Alyssa and I put together a draft a little while ago that was an alternative to the ancestor of the current draft. And the reason for that was because we believed that this matrix approach or mandatory trade-off nice, or however you like to do this, is never going to work. And the reason, at least this was my motivation, I won't speak for Alyssa. The reason that I think that is that fundamentally what you're always doing for any venue is deciding among a whole bunch of trades. And what we were suggesting was that we needed instead a rank ordering of the things that you were going to trade, the ones that were the important stuff, and then everything else. And that was just a random list of stuff, and we were going to have to depend on judgment. Now, I appreciate, Dave, that your view is that this is hopelessly naive. My view is that this.
No, I think it's sophisticated.
Maybe it's
Beyond
hopelessly
our
sophisticated.
capabilities.
My view is that the categories here are sufficiently bad that what will happen is we will end up in two battles. One, when producing this document, the community will rat hole on the categories, and then secondly, every future decision which cuts across these things, people will rat hole on whether the categories were applied correctly, which of course is your objection to the rank ordering instead. So my view is that you can't actually decide on this number or decide what the categories are, or in fact line the differences carefully enough to get this right, and that's the reason that I don't actually like that approach.
Jason Livingood, I agree with Andrew that it's hard when selecting a venue. You're always looking at lots of different trade-offs, and it's a complicated decision. As Glenn said, you can't program it. If we're not careful, we'll end up with 1 or 2 venues that perfectly meet the requirements, and that's the only place we'll go around the world. I think preserving some ability for the folks working on selection to have or to exercise judgment based on lots of different criteria and make that more complicated, nuanced decision is important.
I should mention that, I mentioned it earlier, I'll stress it here. AMS staff have been heavily involved in this discussion. and I'm deeply appreciative that they have pushed quite hard when something seemed impractical. They've been encouraged and have, I suspect even if they hadn't been encouraged, have been very diligent about making sure we hear when something sounds impractical. So the worst case scenario that you're describing, I think we have a safety check against that during this development process.
This is Barry Liba. A couple of comments that built up as I was in the queue. In response to Glenn, I completely agree that we don't want to try to make a computer program for this. But we've had someone, Bob, from the meeting committee say that the wording of our choices needs to be clearer to the committee. So yes, it does matter how we describe the different trade-offs we're talking about. I disagree with Andrew in the ordered list part. I think Dave has separated it out very nicely. There's a set of things that if any one of them fails, we will not have a meeting, and that's the mandatory. The trade-off part is simply, I can't make an ordered list of those that is always going to be right. Sometimes a failure or partial failure of something we might ordinarily consider to be more important trades off against everything else being absolutely perfect. And I think by putting this as just a set of things that can be traded off and leaving it to the intelligence of the meeting committee is the right thing. It gives them guidance without locking them into a particular model and lets them have the flexibility they need.
Leslie Daigle, acknowledging I am IAOC chair, but not speaking as IAOC chair. I think that it's pretty important to understand what it is that we're trying to do. I mean, I certainly resonate with Glenn's comments that we're not building an algorithm, at least not one that we are not going to run code. I think it would be optimistic to think we would find even one meeting venue that would perfectly meet all of our requirements. So given that, I think what we're actually trying to do is understand what it is the community expects so that we can best deliver on community expectations at any given point in time. But I think we actually already have a little bit of running code about what to do when we have a venue that works for a number of criteria, but we know there are perceived issues on another front. And I'm referring specifically to IETF 101. London, in that, we've announced this week that we're going to London, yes, the Metro Hole, for 101. And, but we've also pointed out, we know what some of the issues were, and here are how we're trying to mitigate them with the differentiated room blocks that you can identify whether you want the cheaper rate or the better room, whatever. So all that just sort of to suggest, maybe there's some running code for, as we all go through this learning process of how do we understand what the requirements are, how can we, live in this imperfect world, maybe we don't actually have to try to make this an algorithm. And since I'm up here, I will also observe, I don't think it's for this document or even necessarily for this working group, but we do also have an issue of what do we do with conditions that change in between the time when we negotiate contracts and 3 years later when we get somewhere. And this is far from being a hypothetical situation. We've got it on any number of our upcoming venues.
So this is Jonas Vaninen. So in that on that last point of changing conditions, and especially because we not have on ourselves, but in the world there are changing conditions all the time. Countries that seem stable all of a sudden are not, and things change. We wanted to put some language in the text, basically looking at that. So what are criteria where you start to kind of like think about triggering a change? That if a venue is not anymore acceptable, and what do you do about that? And there was in the last meeting, there was discussion also about what if we have to cancel a meeting completely and do it virtually and so on. I think that in the handover from Fred to Dave, we have a little bit forgotten about that, and we most probably have to come back to that and see how we solve those issues and how we can give guidance on what are kind of like pivotal moments in history which make us change, might change venue or even cancel a meeting.
Yes.
For reference on that topic, it doesn't answer the point that Jan is raising, but the document where it has a discussion of the sequence, the actual operation of the venue, there is a final check about 3 months out. That's probably going to be a significant point for resolving this.
So just to follow up the point, Leslie Daigle again, I think it's important actually to not try to make this document deal with that problem as well, just from the standpoint of modularity. It may be that this working group wants to tackle that, but I would advise tackling it in a separate document because the issues do get complex, once there are contracts in place, and it's a whole different kettle of fish. Once you have contracts in place, once people have tickets purchased, right? I mean, we actually did have to look at Buenos Aires and decide whether Zika was going to be enough of a threat there at a point when people had already paid tickets that they would not have been able to redeem. So it's a big problem. Take it somewhere else.
Alyssa Cooper. So Barry, you said something about making a meeting venue decision, which is right. And I actually think that this is not really about like right decisions and wrong decisions, because I don't think you could really characterize any selection as right or wrong. I think the value of this exercise is in making the decisions justifiable. So to me, the point of writing all of this down is such that in the future, when the IOC makes a selection, which is potentially controversial, and the community questions it, there's a reference point that the IOC can go back to and say, well, look, this is the criteria that we now have enshrined in an RFC, and this is how we can justify that decision after the fact. And so every time I read the document, that's what I think about. And the way that it's written right now, I feel like it doesn't really provide that, because it's a bucket of considerations and many things that can be traded off against each other. And it will always have a good deal of that ambiguity. I don't think we can really get around it. But I think it could have a lot less than it has now. And as it stands now, I don't think it serves that purpose of being usable to justify a controversial decision. So that's part of the reason why I worked with Andrew on the rank ordering. Frankly, like, if the rank ordering isn't the only way to achieve that quality of justifiability, there's other ways, I think, but it was just one way that we thought of. It's possible that using the categories, you could still achieve that, but especially if you look at a couple of the things that are labeled, that are currently labeled whatever, important or desired, but that may land in this trade-off category, I think they're completely not functional as criteria. And those are the ones that talk about the economic health and safety risks being acceptable to the community and the travel barriers to entry being acceptable to the community, because there's just that it's meaningless. Like, it doesn't, saying that those are considerations, saying that they're desired, and making the bar acceptable to the community doesn't provide that mechanism that the IOC needs to be able to justify them after the fact, because they don't offer any actual guidance. So that's the direction that I think this needs to go in. If people don't like the rank ordering, we can talk about another way. But as it stands, I don't think it actually is serving the purpose.
So I'm going to suggest closing the line for whatever got people up to the line right now after this, and then try to move into seeing whether we can make some decisions.
This is Barry, and Alyssa, I'm pretty sure you didn't mean what you said as strongly as I heard it. But if I thought this was all about being able to justify things after the fact and basically covering ourselves, I would despair. I'm aiming this at actually giving useful advice to the meetings committee, and I think that's where we need to focus it. If a side effect of that is they can say, yeah, we did what you told us to do. Okay, fine, but that to me is not the focus of this.
Alyssa, I was actually serious about trying to close the line. And because this stuff can be discussed for a very long time, and it should be, but we don't have an infinite amount. And I'd like to try to move us towards making some choices.
Tobias Gondrom, IEOC, but IEOC head off. So I heard a couple of people say this is not a program code. If you state something as mandatory, if I'm a community member, actually I see this as a binary choice, yes or no. And in that essence, actually it is a program code. So if you don't want this to be a program code, then I think you should be extremely careful with the word mandatory, because if I'm on the meetings committee or if I'm in the community, I will expect mandatory to be fulfilled. Otherwise, probably people will scream, and rightfully so. So the use of mandatory should be extremely carefully and probably strongly discouraged, because there's a lot of choices that might not be possible.
Mary Barnes. So I liked a lot of what Alyssa said, and I don't know that she meant the word justify so much as make the community aware of the trade-offs that the committee had to make, right? Which I think that's the important thing. The community wants to know when we're going to go somewhere, what we're going to run into. Like, we know we're going to London and it's going to be a habit trail maze, but we know Stephanie and the other secretariat people will help entertain us while we're going through the maze. So that'll be cool. It was really awesome if you weren't there. So anyways, I think keeping things simpler, I think, is better. In my first introduction to this stuff, I hadn't read the detailed meeting venue. I read the Andrew and Alyssa's, and I liked that, and was very confused by the meeting venue document initially. So, and I think the food thing is a good example, right? When I go there, I want to know whether or not there's a grocery store, or the secretary and the organizers have made sure that the staff are aware of people like me, right? And that I can get food to eat.
Hello, this is Niels ten Oever. I would first like to say that I think it's really great that we're still having this discussion, and that it's also moving to a point where it's getting more concrete. I would really like to echo what Alyssa said, and also the previous speaker, because I think we cannot hard code what we're going to do. And having some experience with, for instance, human rights impact assessments of companies, is that we cannot say what we're going to encounter. But it's very crucial that we say, we take all these things into account and we document how we came to these choices, because we cannot say beforehand what is important, what is going to be important, but document that we're taking these things into account, and then having a discussion into AC and making IAOC and making that justifiable so the community can have a discussion about it as well, I think is the most essential part of what we should be doing here. So I think that's really going forward well.
Okay, so what I'd like to make some attempt at is resolving some of the items up there. And there's different ways of doing that, but I'm going to choose one and we'll see how it goes. The first bullet provides an alternative of 3 sets of labels. If anyone wants to propose an additional set, they should do that sooner rather than later.
Lou Berger, are you open to such a proposal right now?
Yes.
Why don't we use our normal language? Should, must, may. We have a process. We have terms.
I have to tell you, I really appreciate the room reaction as clarifying a possible rejection of that suggestion. But let me check.
All right, I accept that it's
there's an
rejected.
intuitive appeal to the suggestion, but the room reaction said maybe not. Anyone else want to advocate the choice?
Well, this is Barry. I'll just say that those are designed for code, and they don't have the flexibility we'd like for this, I think.
First of all, it's 3 levels. So we have another. We're talking 3 levels. And while we grappled with it, we have applied those to requirements documents before. And we've done it a number of times. We have running code. It's our process. Let's follow our process rather than invent a new one.
Jim Martin. One point to keep in mind is that it's entirely likely that people who are in the hospitality community will read our document. They would like to see what we want.
I'm sorry, which community?
The hospitality community. Should, must, and may doesn't mean to them what it means to us. As a potential alternative, how about, I like the 3, but what if it was nice, important, and mandatory? I think that means something to people who are not in our community.
So I was going to get to the actual vocabulary choice as a second phase.
Sure.
And on the other hand, I think Lou's suggestion highlights that vocabulary matters in this. And it's in fact the reason that I landed on thinking we need different words than may, must, and should, because we're actually using them in some ways. The must and the may, maybe it's similar or the same. The should is completely different because the concept of trade-offs isn't part of should. The semantics of should is you really have to unless you really know what you're doing. We mean something completely different for what I think the middle category is. So a quick hum on Lou's suggestion. The suggestion is we will use the existing IETF normative vocabulary. Those in favor hum yes. Those against hum no. Not even close to rough consensus. We can get, well, okay. I'm sorry?
I was throwing that out just they were mandatory and important. Nice.
Oh, that was a vocabulary one. Sorry, and yeah. Well, yes. Okay, yes, it was.
Noting that these suggestions need to be recorded because they do go out to the mailing list for decision, right? So,
we have a note taker, right?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So Jim's suggestion. I'm sorry. Repeat it.
Nice, important, mandatory.
Okay. That's clearly a reasonable suggestion. There have been several proposals that get into that roughly that space. I will tell you that in formulating this, and not just for these slides, but leading up to this, I wanted words that had a reasonable intuitive import. And I landed on trade-off because that seems to be the key semantic to that category. If it's not the key semantic, then that's the point to discuss.
So,
and we should do that before we figure on the label.
So just this, Jonan, the kind of like, I'm not sure if we should go through the actual vocabulary here, more kind of go through first is that which levels we have. Do we have 4 or do we have 3? And the ranking order discussion. Then we can debate the vocabulary when we know how many levels we actually have.
Okay.
May I make one comment toward vocabulary?
Only after you say your name.
Mike Bishop. Regardless of levels, you currently have nice as the lowest one. And we're thinking about intuitive sense. I don't know that nice really communicates that we would really like to have these. And nice is just, oh, okay.
Okay, so the semantic that, so let me, this is going to be a little weird because it's there's a chicken and egg trade-off, haha, pun. Let's decide on the number and then decide on the semantic. Choices are between 4, 3, and 2. I haven't heard anybody lobbying in, oh, sorry. So there's 4, 3, 2, and 1. Well, the ordering is 1. There's 1 pool. So this is interesting.
I'm asking for a clarification. I'm going to look at Alyssa. I interpreted your proposal as ordered as any number. So it's 2, 3, 4, or n. And you would order them 1, 2, 3, 4 and have an ordered list. Is that not what you meant?
So what our draft does is there's 5 categories of criteria and they're listed in order. So the idea would be if you enter a situation where you are trading off between 2 of the categories, the one that is listed first in the ordering takes precedence.
Lou Berger again. I thought I heard you say here that if we needed to add more, you would add more. So that makes it N. Is that a correct interpretation?
I'm not understanding the question, so maybe you should answer.
So maybe this, maybe I can paraphrase that. So basically what he's saying is that there wouldn't be actually a category,
Right.
but the order itself makes the category. So if you have 5, you have 5 categories. If you have 20, you have 20 categories in a way. The question is that you don't have an explicit category where to put it. It's kind of what Dave also said, is a category of 1. It's the order that makes the difference.
Yes, there are no labels. So therefore there's no like number of
So
labels.
I think the proposal for the choices would add to this one that I'm going to call ordered. And it doesn't need a number associated, but that's the concept of that one.
This is Andrew Sullivan, though. I made this point in the Jabber room, but I don't know how it's not coming across, but we've tried different ways, so I'll try again at the mic. The other point, though, about this is that it's not just like a different strategy, it's a completely different conception of the job here. So the like enormous bucket list is not allowed under the ordered list. The whole point is that you get like 5 or 6 that are the things that you trade off, and then there's other. And other, like once you get below a certain level, they're just flat. And there's no like ordering at that point because they're all just things that you have to trade off against one another, and it's hopeless. And I think the point is that almost everything under 3 that is in the nice category falls into this flat category. There's no way to choose among them. And the point that we have been trying to make is that there are things that are all going to have to be traded off against one another, and there ought to be some order because that's guidance to the IOC. And the rest of them are, hey, you got to pick.
So as a longtime participant in the meetings committee, I'll suggest that what you're describing doesn't match my sense of how the actual process works. There are a collection of things that we treat as mandatory. There are some trade-offs that happen, and then there's some other goodies which may not even get talked about, although they're desired. And that what we would end up doing is being more explicit about this. But the really essential point is the stuff that gets traded off is not a large number, and the discussion for trading off is actually difficult. Or really easy. And the piece that I never got from your draft is that if we land on any substantial amount of an ordering list, which is a version of trading off, we need an algorithm to go with it that people understand and believe is workable. And I think we're missing that now.
But that's not, you don't think that's true for this, for the categories. So if you had a rank ordering, you would need an algorithm, but when you have categories, you don't.
I'm sorry, say again?
If you have a rank ordering, then you feel that you need an algorithm, but when you have categories, you feel that you don't.
When you say when you have categories.
Like this mandatory trade-off nice.
So mandatory, the definition of mandatory was straightforward. There's no trading off there. And the middle one was the one where there might be trade-offs, and the latter one doesn't play either because it's nothing in there as a showstopper. So I think the answer to your question is for that one that I've just described, we need an algorithm for the middle one.
Okay.
But it's a small category.
This is Melinda. We've been having the same discussion for quite some time now, and it doesn't seem to be moving towards resolution. So what might be helpful is to get some feedback from other IAOC meeting committee participants in terms of what they would actually find useful in practice.
Dan York, I apologize, I have not read Andrew and Alyssa's draft, but I have a question here. It sounds like we're doing the engineer thing and we're coming into all sorts of different algorithms and methods and routines. But to Jim's point earlier, part of the goal of this, in my mind, part of it is an audience of us, but it will also be seen by people in the hospitality world and other places and things like that. And we just had a here saying we shouldn't use our RFC 2119 or 2119 language here. has anyone done a survey of what is there a common practice in the hospitality industry for the terms or things like that that they expect in contracts? I don't know. I'm just asking that question. Is that something we're coming up with our terms here of what we think we want to put in there?
So you said contract this, and
well,
this discussion's pre-contract.
You're right, but it's putting that, it's in that process of getting to that point. I don't know. I'm just wondering, are we arguing about something that we're speaking French when the people who may consume this out there are looking for German? Something.
So in response to Melinda's query, I think we have 3 meetings committee members here. And I'm intentionally leaving out staff to not to exclude them from participating, but to not put them on the spot. The politics of staff participation is always different than the rest of us. You're not allowed to shoot at staff, for example, and clearly you're required to shoot at us. Speaking of Laura.
Well, I'm happy no one's going to shoot at me. Laura Nugent. I just wanted to mention from an operational perspective, I think 2 categories would be the best. You have required, which are not negotiable, and you have desired, which are ultimately negotiable. That'll be clear to people that you're working with in the hotel, et cetera, industries, but also from my perspective, operationally very clear as well, because I know what is absolutely required and where people can bring judgment in to assess things.
So it turns out the reason that I think 2 would be great if we could do that. The reason that I'm in favor of 3 rather than 2 is there's a separate negotiation. Yeah, you cited the hotel people, and for that, that's just fine. There's also the IETF community, and the point behind the 3rd category is that's not a negotiation. We decide what's in that pool, and after that, people don't get to complain if we don't satisfy it. So it helps our ability to push back on the community for some set of issues.
This is Lou Berger. I actually found the prior comment by Laura really helpful because I understand the need for mandatory. If we don't meet that, we don't go. I understand the nice. That means it's a wish list, and it's important because that's where things that don't fit mandatory go. And I didn't understand the desirable, but I think she just helped us understand what the definition of desirable should be. Those are the things that come into the negotiation, and that's a helpful definition if that's the one we want to go with. But I do think we need 3. In particular, we need an answer of when it doesn't fit the first 2, the mandatory or this desirable, where does it go? So we know where that fits, as opposed to we have forgotten about it.
Yeah, so I'll close the mic lines after the last one on the mic, and the kind of like, I think it's time to do some humming most probably after that. So go ahead.
So Glendine again. I'm going to come back to the discussion I'm hearing between Alyssa's and document and this document is, I think, again, coming back to this idea that we're trying to be very detailed and create the algorithm for the negotiation and the algorithm for evaluating like the decision. I really think that's the wrong direction. I think it's going to lead to, we'll never get this done. This is guidance from the community to the meetings committee and the IOC. They're the ones that are going to go negotiate the contracts. We're not telling them how to do that. We're not telling them the language they need to use in the contracts. We're giving them guidance in our words, in our opinions, on what we, the community, want in a meeting venue. It's that simple. And if we keep it simple like that, and we can tell there's things we view as mandatory. There are things we view as we're flexible on it. And there's things that if you can give it to me, that would be great, but I'll live without it. And let's not get so mired in the detail that we try to create algorithms and all that detail. I like the mandatory trade-off nice thing for what it's worth.
Jim Martin, also I'm meetings committee as well, but I'm speaking as an individual. The truth here is that I fear that we're desperately, again, just echoing other people, trying to turn this into an algorithm. And really, fundamentally, what we're trying to do is say, these are the things we believe in. This is what we think is important. And we're not trying to come up with an algorithm or a process. We're trying to say, when you're doing your work, here are the things that you should keep in mind. And so as we go through here and break it down, I want to make sure that we don't make this too complicated, because otherwise this ends up largely being a bat from somebody who's unhappy with the selection to say, hey, you missed 2.3.7, and that was there were 3 trade-offs there, and you really should have taken care of me. I don't think we want to go down that road. I think what we want to do is make sure it's clear to the meetings committee folks what it is that the community wants, and then let them do the best they can to give us the best thing we have that they can find.
So the one pushback, I mean, I agree with everything you said up to the end, and the challenge here is the danger of getting it wrong and post hoc having the community get upset. Or, and this is the important operational point, the danger of having to consult the community constantly because we're not sure. And so part of the goal here is that clarity that you're talking about, where the meetings committee believes it has a sufficient understanding of the community desires or needs or requirements, means that the meetings committee does not feel that, or the IOC doesn't feel that it has to go to the community very often to get something resolved.
Thank you, Marco Hoogwoning. I want to kind of jump back a bit to Laura, and when it comes to implementation, keep in mind who you are negotiating with. Some of these items listed, you're negotiating with a hotel, and it's either a yes or a no. Some items listed are non-negotiable. You're not going to negotiate with the country about who gets access or not. That's a negotiation we're having with the community ourselves. The hotel isn't going to open a grocery store. There is a grocery store, we find it satisfactory. There isn't a grocery store, we don't find it satisfactory. That's an internal negotiation. When it comes to hotels, it's fairly simple. We need this, this, and this. Here we're able to negotiate and take it or leave it. And when you start categorizing, when you start implementing, keep in mind who you are negotiating with. That's what I would say.
Okay, I think it's time to at least try to do some decision making. So I think that what we have is 4 options. So category of 4, categories of 3, categories of 2, and instead of that having a relatively short ranking order, and then a category of flat things associated with that. And so let's try this. I'm not sure if this is going to work, but let's see.
Perhaps do this as a 2-pass decision process, looking for the 2 strongest, and then
right. I think that is most probably right to do. Let's try first the 4 categories. Hum, if you like that. Well, that is quite clear. At least 1 down. Then let's try 3 categories. Hum, if you like that. Okay. 2 categories. Okay, and then rank order. So I think we have a decision point to make between 3 categories and the ranking order. Those seem to be the closest to each other. So I'm like, the first one was quite clear. And then we have Bob Hinden on the microphone.
I'm going to ask a
I don't know if that's another
clarifying
option.
question, Bob Hinden. So, I mean, one thought, I think after Laura suggested 2 is, I mean, you could have 2 and then, well, the first one, I don't think you have to rank order. If you had a second category, you could rank order things in that. So these are not necessarily alternative choices.
These, of course, you can do things inside of these as well, but let's try to take the kind of broad approach first, that where we have the categories, but not ranked order over the whole list, but then you can do things inside those categories if you want to. But or as an alternative, that we don't have those 3 categories, but we have a ranked order. So was that clear? Or did I just confuse the heck of? I confused the heck of Melinda, but that's fine. So let's try first with the 3 categories. Hum. The second choice is ranking order. Yeah. So the first is 3 categories. And the next is the ranking order. It's very rough. The kind of like, there's a very slight difference in that. I don't know really where to go from there. I think we most probably need, but some people do. That's good.
Well, where I know not to go is to try to determine this based on how loud the hums were. It's very clear we have significant constituencies for both, and we need to deal with the objections, not just the numbers.
Lou Berger, whatever the end result between this, it's really important to have documented the criteria which are absolutes for the community. We have to have a document that says, if this is not met, we don't go there. That's really important. Whether the rest of the stuff, it's optimization. But that first one, we go there, the community, we've done our job wrong.
So my prediction is, given how close those two were, is that we're not going to resolve this today, but we might help a lot. If we can resolve it, that's great, but I suspect we won't. And I'm appreciative of Barry raising this point, which was one of the interesting points in Pete Resnick's document, and that is that one way to pursue these kinds of impasses is to carefully discuss the objections and deal with those substantively. And so, for example, on the rank ordering, one of my objections is I actually don't know what the process of using it will be. And worse than that, my sense of the research history and operational history in general with rank ordered decision making is that it's very difficult and it's unstable. So at a minimum, we need a well specified algorithm for using that.
Jari Arko, not wearing any hats for this comment. First of all, I fully agree with Barry's comment that is what we have to do. And I think it's not just the objections, but I'm not totally convinced that everybody completely understands what we actually are talking about here, what the implications are. It might be we're sort of presenting a choice, but the actual issues are somewhat elsewhere. And just to give you an example of that, and I mean, I've been sort of resisting coming to the microphone and providing my own opinions, but just providing one example of those as really only an example. So why I liked Alice's and Andrew's document was that it was, I'm a simple-minded man. I can only hold so many things in my head, and it really provided, the clear things that this is what we have to get right, and the 5 first things, and it was good for that. So there's that, and then another approach might be more of a laundry list thing, which is far harder to keep in your head and get correct. So it's not necessarily just on the question of how you label things and whether you have priority order or label. Might be a little bit of a mixture of other things as well. Thank you.
The devil here, Andrew, the devil here is in the details. So I think the two can be put together, but we need a little bit more text and see to agree. And by the way, people who will execute on that should really have enough input, because they will need to somehow make this happen in the real life.
Glendine, may I suggest an approach that might help here? And that is to go through the current draft and pull out into a single slide or something that can be sent to the mailing list the breakdown of this is what's mandatory, bang, 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 3, 4, whatever items it is. This is what would be a trade-off amount. Let people see them. And this would be what would fall into the nice category. If we actually see what that looks like, we actually may just go, yeah, that feels right, and I'm pretty good with that.
So those who are on the microphone continue, but I think we are running out of time soon, and we have to go to talk about Suresh's draft a little bit as well. I don't think we can completely decide this time, but just...
Okay, I'll talk really fast. So Mary Barnes. No, so I'm going to talk a little bit about my objection to the rank ordering. That document, I did provide feedback on that document, and that document as it is now will do miserable things in terms of the food requirements, right? It will not be satisfied with that one. So we'd have to do a lot of work on that, and I think the more work we did on that, the more it might start looking like the one we have right now.
Alyssa Cooper. I kind of liked your suggestion, Bob, of the merge, because I think one of the problems with the rank ordering document as written now is that which items that are strictly mandatory is not clear. So I think it would be totally feasible to do a mandatory bucket, a trade-off bucket that is ordered, and then another flat bucket below. So that might be one approach. But just to respond to Glenn's point, there's a bunch of items in this document for which the label is currently unclear. So that's, I think, part of the issue is that we couldn't just pull them all out and sort them right now because, Dave has annotated it with it's not obvious which one this should be in. And so I think that's actually part of the difficulty, as I said, in particular with the ones for which the criteria is acceptable to the community. I don't know how you evaluate that or trade it off against anything else right now.
Jim Martin. To that point, as well as to Glenn's point, when we do establish the set of mandatories, I think it's really important that we then go back to something that we did really early in the process, which is map it against meetings we've had and meetings that we've got, and make sure after we say, hey, these are the mandatory things, which of the ones that we had successful meetings at wouldn't we be able to do under the new rules? Because if that's the case, we might want to double check our thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for suggesting that. It was helpful when it was done before, and it will be again.
Ray Pelletier, I think you ought to take a hum on Alyssa's suggestion. I think that's the right way to go. Mandatory, the rank order trade-off, and the flat list, the nice thing. I think we could end this.
Mary Barnes, and I just want to say, follow up on Jim's comment about go back to past meetings. I've actually done that for the food thing, so.
Barry Lieber, rather than taking a hum on that, as Ray said, why don't we try just writing it up and seeing what it looks like and letting us see it and see whether we like it.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a good way forward. Then we know actually what we are discussing about and we are not. And then we can do more informed decision. I think we really need to move on this point, Bob. Is this absolutely necessary?
Let's have more global comment. So can the next version of the document be like a single document? Because I had trouble reading it. There's like the first part, and then there's parts which I think are from the other document, and there's redundancy. Can we just have a single document to review?
So I'm not sure what you mean it isn't a single document. I do know that that the version that's out there now is fragmented in some ways, which may be what you mean.
Yeah, I think.
And I've been doing a fair amount of what I hope is cleanup work. It's certainly meant to be. It doesn't put everything into a single pool because there's some other benefits in having sections for areas. But it might be a lot cleaner for people to understand what the choices are from the most recent draft.
In reading it, I was a little confused because I was reading sort of the same thing.
And I have been trying to look for redundancies. I probably didn't get all of them, but I tried to get the ones I could.
Okay. You had more slides. The question is, do you need to go?
What's the next slide? Oh, yes. Thank you. I know why you want this slide. Yes. All right. So there's speaking of process, the process for the draft is I will be releasing -03, which is my best take, and I will fold in what I can from today. From going forward, the basic model is people who are requesting changes need to do that as an editing directive, and then of course people need to support the change. Is that a reasonable summary, Lou?
Lou Berger, I think it's reasonable, but it's one nuance is discussion's great. We should have them. We're not suggesting stopping them. But at the end of the discussion, we have to understand what the resolution of the discussion is if it's going to change the text. Meaning, after we have a nice long discussion, we need something that says, okay, this is the text that's going to change based on the discussion. Does everyone agree? And if we end without such a change, the discussion has just been a nice thing and we've documented on the list, but there's no change to the document. Because without us agreeing to the specific change, we as authors and editors can't necessarily interpret what the decision is of the working group.
Right, and there's a slide after this. I took this as a variation of the previous slide just to help people. You can tell where these last two slides came
Yeah,
from.
sorry. I put them together, these slides together based on a conversation we had among the authors, including Laura. Laura, there was a really good point where, which came from staff, which is we have to make sure that we give direction to the professionals, but also allow the professionals to do their job. And we've heard a little bit about that in the comments relative to the IAOC. You know, let's let the IAOC members do their job, but we as the community, including the IAOC, have to let the professionals do their job too. So we have to be sensitive to that in our language.
Yeah, I'm not sure I completely understand the last two slides, but I'm kind of like eager to see what that means in the written text then in the next time. So then we know what we're talking about. Thank you very much. I think that now it's, I hope that the authors, co-authors have now enough guidance to go on by this. And I would like to go to the next topic, which is Suresh.
Hi, my name is Suresh. Like, I'm the author of like another document in this working group. Like, I'm pretty sure like most people have not seen it because I haven't received any comments on it since the last meeting. So there's like two possibilities. Like, one of them is it's all good to go, ready to go, and it's a bit doubtful. So I really would request like people to read the document and provide some comments. So there was like a round of comments like before the last meeting, and I did incorporate them. But after that, it's been like crickets. Like, and next slide, please. Thanks. So like, I just want to put down like this reason, like why there's this like two documents at the beginning and not one document, was that the document, like draft cushion, was supposed to be like the high level policy that doesn't change very frequently. And like draft Baker, which is now draft IETF, was the one which specified the gory details of things, and that like could change like in a shorter time period than this like overall policy. So that's why there were two documents. Next slide. So as I said, like all the like discussion is on the working group document, which is like very good because I think we need to get that done. But I just want to figure out like if there's anything for me to do to get this other document done as well. So the options are you just like fold it all into one document. That's a possibility, or work with like Alisa's document and like Andrew's document and like merge something in from there, or whatever the working group wants to do. But like it's not clear to me what the next steps are for me to do. So I just like want to come up here and stand here like and take the tomatoes.
Yeah, so just to remind everybody, so in our charter, we have these two separate documents. One is policy and one is the process. And and of course, that is our current charter. I'm sure that that can be changed if there's enough pressure to do that. But just to remind you in this discussion that that's the original direction that we took. So Barry.
Barry Liba, what you just said, Jan, is one of the reasons I don't like to put document specifics in charters. But I think the IESG would be open to letting you merge them without rechartering anyway. I think they should go in one document. I think it's silly to have a small document with this, and the rationale that Suresh gave of changing fast or changing slow doesn't seem to apply to me, because once either document comes out as an RFC, there's a process to change it, and I would rather see this be put into the other.
Thanks, Barry. Andrew?
Andrew Sullivan, I had actually exactly the opposite reaction, which is you're not getting feedback on this because it's ready. Last call it and ship it. As far as I can tell, this is a simple thing, but this is a policy about how we're going to travel around the world, not how we're going to decide where we go when we go there.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thanks. Dave?
Dave Crocker. I'd like to say one document rather than two. And my main reason is that having two documents lets us get divergent about what conforms to which or what doesn't give enough practical guidance. Whereas if it's in a single document, we can move towards convergence of the meaning of the high-level statements and the low-level directives.
Okay, thank you.
Jari?
Jari, the first comment that I have is with my hat on as the AD of the group. Whatever you guys want to do in this working group, we'll listen to that. And if you want one document or 15, that's we can discuss that. That probably can be arranged. And then a personal comment without the hat. I see a lot of value in modular documents and saying a different thing in a different document. And it's not necessarily clear to me that we have everything's lined up in the other document and ready to go either. So I'd be personally interested in getting this forward, and it's +1 to what Andrew said. I think this one's ready, and we actually agree on that, and we do realize that there's lots of detail on how we actually select those places, and that's why we have the other document. It's not that this document claims that we have all that detail, but it's the overall policy.
Thank you.
Tobias Gondrom, working IOC head off. So personally, my feeling is, yeah, let's get this out. There's one comment or one question maybe to consider. And that is, sometimes we come to the question whether we can do these 1111 policies, or whether that is in conflict with actually the selection of the venue. Like if there is no venue that fulfills the process requirements available, like there is a conflict between these two, policy and process. And I don't know where we tackle that, or whether we need to tackle that, or whatever. So that might be a little bit an argument for putting both in one. But like, just as a
so just to answer you, Tobias, like there's actually text in the draft. Like it actually talks about 111 star not being like on a calendar year basis, right? So if you have like if you have a problem finding a venue like in a year, the idea is to balance it out, right? Like so that's the policy. So it's not really in conflict, but it's something that has to be balanced.
I hear you. I can imagine a process draft that will make it even within 2 years or 3 years quite difficult, depending on what's in the process draft to fulfill the policy. I'm just saying that from an abstract point. So that's kind of thought why maybe both can be useful in one, but I really have no strong opinion. Just want
Thank you.
Ready?
Barry, again, I have an idea. Andrew and Yali, what would you think of, as you say, cutting this one, sending it out, it's ready, but also incorporating it into the other document, and when that document is published, have it obsolete this so we have everything in one place? Yeah, Dave is shaking his head.
What's the benefit?
The benefit is ultimately getting to one document rather than having two.
Lou Berger, I was basically going to say the same thing. Why is that a goal? Let's make this working group document, do a passive review, do a round of review on it, and then last call it. At least we can make it a working group document. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I want to state my preference too. I want this to be like a separate document and get it out and sent off like so, just as an author.
So let's try this. So let's hunt for the adoption of this document as a working group document. How many people think that this document should be a working group document at this point? How many people think it should not? I think that gives us some guidance for this point at least. So let's take it as working group document, and of course, we have to confirm this on the mailing list. Thank you, Bob. Like everything has to be confirmed on the mailing list. That is, let's put that as a disclaimer as in general. Okay, I think that you have your guidance, what you needed there. And just coincidentally, I think we're out of time as well. So thank you, everybody. I think this was very useful, and I think we have a way forward. So thank you. And thank you for Lou, for Jabber, and for Timo for the meeting notes. Are we missing any blue sheets? Or did we get both of them?
We've got one of them. Blue sheets?
Blue sheets, there's one blue sheet still missing somewhere.